You're watching the JJ Podcast.
In 2023, a referendum was held for Australians to vote on whether or not they supported an Indigenous voice to Parliament. The result at that time was an overwhelming no, with Aussies wanting us to be a united nation and not divided based on race. In July 2025, Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen announced that Victoria would ignore the voice of Australians and introduce its own version of a voice to Parliament. We met with leader of the No campaign, Indigenous leader Warren Mundine, to ask his thoughts.
Well, Warren Mundine, Indigenous leader, author and businessman, thank you so much for your time today. I wanted to get your thoughts on what was announced earlier in the week about Victoria getting their own voice to Parliament. What do you think of this, and is it a good idea?
This is a typical example of when people are ignoring the will of the people. In fact, when you look at it, First People's Assembly, which was set up by the Dan Andrews government, I think it was, when they had the elections for the eligible Aboriginal people of Victoria who could vote in that election, only 7% of them voted. And then they had a second election and they only got 7% again. So that shows me that 93% of Aboriginal people in Victoria couldn't give a toss. They don't recognise. So this idea that they then come out and say that, oh, this is the voice, the representative of Aboriginal, no, it's not. If we had an election for the federal parliament, only 7% of the people voted, you'd say, what the hell?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because what's happening is that most Aboriginals, the vast majority of Aboriginals have moved on from this separatism. In fact, if you go back to me when I was a kid, and give my age away from here, the 1850s, no, it wasn't, 1950s, we were under the Aboriginal Acts, the old segregation acts and that. And all my parents, my grandparents, my older siblings, I'm number 9 of 11 kids, so my older siblings and that, they all fought for equality. They wanted to be recognised as Australians. They wanted to have full voting rights. They wanted to have all the laws that affect Australians as a whole. That's what they wanted. They didn't want separate stuff. But my father, when he came back from the Second World War, my mum and dad, they bought a house in 1947. In those days, he knew that he would not get a full wage because under the laws then, they said, like for instance, he was a grader operator for the old Department of Main Roads. If you're a grader operator, because we're into equality now, go women, is that you get $100 for, let's say £100 in them days, and I would only get 60 or 70 pounds, and that was the way it was. My father, and this is where my family and my dad was very strong Labor people. I got that background from. He joined the union, the Australian Workers' Union, and they got him a full wage. He was able to buy a house because he wanted equality. But even buying a house, he couldn't get a bank loan. He actually had there was a shop owner in Grafton who lent him the money. And that was the same with my grandfather when he bought a house in Nambucca Heads. He was a sawmiller, a well-respected Aboriginal bloke in Nambucca Valley. He had to get the same thing, a shop owner in Nambucca actually lent him the money to get a house. And so we wanted to be able to go to banks. We wanted to be able to get equal pay. We wanted to get all these rights and that. And that's what we fought for. And that's what, in 1962, we got full voting rights. It was the Menzies government. My fear is we don't talk about that is because it was the Menzies government rather than actually being the Labor Party. It was the Labor Party that had parades and celebrations and have a day off every year, and they'd put statues up, then they'd pull them down. And then it was 67, we were citizens of Australia because we were British subjects, and under the Citizenship Act, if you're a British subject, you're an Australian citizen. But the state laws and territory laws still were in place. So we were still under this archaic colonial legislation, which had us kept separate. 67, the whole government got through the constitutional change, which got rid of all those laws. In fact, by 1969, 1970, all those laws had disappeared. And this is what we fought for, and this is what we wanted, to be treated as equals, to be treated the same as everyone else. Great things come out of that. You had there was another thing. It was the Gorton government that did this Aboriginal education program, AB studies as they called it. that allowed us to get to universities and get through school. I remember it helped me get my school uniforms, get me through the school. That was back in 1970. Then you had the land rights legislation that come in and actually started looking at, in the Northern Territory it was in those days, how traditional groups could get their land back, and that. Then you went on for a whole lot of other things: Aboriginal Medical Service, Aboriginal Legal Services. Then of course you had the Mabo decision, which recognised our pre-colonial rights and that. And then we had now the recent case in the High Court which said that native title, because it's based on English law, common law, English common law, that means, which was the land law that would come into England when they're going from a tribal society into a more structured society, then that gave them rights and that. So this is what we want to think. We do not want this separatism, and that's why it was so defeated, the Voice campaign, because it was a massive step too far. And it also didn't deal with the reality. The reality was, if I go to Canberra and I'm in Sydney or Melbourne or Perth or something like that, I'm in the parliaments, I'm not tripping over Aboriginals all the time. They're there lobbying about laws for themselves, they're lobbying about programs and that, and so they do have a voice. In fact, we've got the Land Council. In New South Wales, we've got 118 land councils. In the Northern Territory, you've got 4 land councils. So we have this voice, the parliament. To us, it was just getting a group of elite Aboriginal people and giving them a job.
Are the Indigenous community consulted before things like this Voice to Parliament goes forward? I know you're just talking about how only 7% went out and voted. Yeah. But what's the consultation process like before something like this goes into?
There's a lot of consultation process that goes out, but it's the same issue again. You're talking to yourselves in a lot of ways. They hire these Aboriginal people who depend on these bodies to have a job, and they go out and do this consultation. And because a lot of Aboriginals, they've got to have jobs, and their families are doing okay. In fact, if you look at they're always highlighting the issues, the problems. But these problems are mainly in remote and regional Australia. Most Aboriginals, in fact, if you look at about 80% on every scale are equal to everyone else. So whether they're a cleaner, they're equal to a cleaner. If they're a doctor, they're equal to a doctor. If they're a lawyer, I don't know if that helps civilization, but you've got lawyers and they're equal to other lawyers. It's all for that. If you've got an education, you've got the same opportunities and everything else as everyone else. There's only that 20% that we've got to deal with, who are having those problems. And it's really serious problems that are in these communities. So to me, even when they do the consultations, they're just talking to themselves, because when it comes down to it, you look at everybody, and there's been 50 years of examples of this. 50 years of National Aboriginal Council, ADSIC, and now these other bodies that have been put up, and they're only getting small votes. Even South Australia, which has their own voice to Parliament, only 10% of Aboriginals who were eligible voted for it. We had people elected on that council, on that body, Voice to Parliament, on 6 votes. So how can you claim to be a representative of Aboriginal people? Plus, it's not our culture. Our culture is, and it's about land. We are tied to our land. So and this is what the native title law is about. You have to prove empirical evidence and that you belong to that country. So if it's in Bundjalung country, then you have to be a descendant of Bundjalung people. You have to be of that land. None of that's recognised in any of these things they talk about in Voice to Parliament, which is really bizarre, because when you look at the heritage laws, when you look at the economic development laws and all that type of stuff, you have to talk to the traditional owners. None of that's in these things.
So what are some real solutions to improve the outcomes for Indigenous community?
One of the big disappointments for me is after the referendum, because we saw the referendum is not the end of everything. We saw that as a continuation. So I was on the No campaign, but we still had to do other things. So and then we noticed that the government, everything stopped until this Voice to Parliament come up again at the state and territory level. And so I read a paper about it from the Centre for Independent Studies, which is about where to now. And so there's 4 areas I mainly looked at. One is education. Education is the key. It's always been the key, and especially in the 21st century, it is the key. You've got to get even basic education of getting through to year 12. You've got to have that. And how do we do those things? And also universities and trades and all that type of thing. The second one, of course, coming off that is jobs. Now we look at projects that are happening around Australia. There's enough projects around Australia to employ and get people into jobs. And I use the example of what we did when I was advisor to Tony Abbott and to Malcolm Turnbull, was we set up the Business and Economic Development Program. So what we did was just twig the government policy on contracts, and we said, okay, why don't we give 3% of contracts to Aboriginal businesses? Have to still be on merit. It's no good Warren turning up and they say to Warren, okay, we've got a job here, you've got to jackhammer through that wall over there. And I sit there and go, I don't know how to jackhammer through that. No, you've still got to be able to do that stuff and be just as good as anyone else. 45,000 jobs created out of that, 25,000 then to Aboriginal people and 20,000 to other people who had to come in and work in those businesses. And that. This is the way forward, economic development, jobs. That's number 2. Number 3 is governance within these Aboriginal organisations. Through the mining industry, there's something like $4 billion goes to Aboriginal communities in royalties and in other areas and that as well. And in fact, if people may be surprised, there's about 7,000 Aboriginals who work in the mining industry. Tradies right up to mine superintendents and stuff like that. $4 billion going into that area. But when you look at those communities, they're living in poverty. And you sort of go, what's going on here? Because when you look at some of these big trusts, they've got $600 million, $1 billion and stuff like that within the trust. But how is that reaching the people on the ground? Whose land it is that people are mining on? So that's something we've got to have a look at, and how do we work on that and get that better. Also, there's nothing wrong with every now and again just having a good look at how governance operates, how things are operating, so you don't get into a situation of corruption. And there are some, but it's minor, and also about making sure that people who's actually organisation is supposed to be looking after them is actually looking after them. And then the final one, which is the big one, is crime. And I believe crime happens because of the first 3. Kids aren't turning up. We're getting low rates of kids to school, low education achievements, people not having jobs, parents not having jobs, and of course the money's not hitting the ground. So then that has that spin out of it. And you look at youth crime across the country, and in fact I was looking at a figure today, in Victoria's gone up 17%, and it wouldn't surprise me across Australia that's happening, and in a large percentage of that in Aboriginal kids. And so we have to get them educated into jobs, running a business, and ensuring that the monies are hitting the ground.
I also wanted to get your thoughts on these pro-Palestinian rallies that we're seeing popping up around the country, and Aboriginal flags are sometimes seen in amongst that. What are your thoughts when you see the Aboriginal flag pop up at rallies like that?
Well, look, it's based on a falsehood, based on this idea that Israelis are colonisers, that they don't come from there, they're not Indigenous people from there, and so Aboriginal people have been colonised and they are from here, and other people have come here and that. So it's built on a falsehood, because Jews, starting with the Jews, because Israelis are more than Jews. In fact, 20% of the population is actually Palestinians, Arabs. And a lot of them serve in the military, and a lot of them serve in all equal to everyone else in the society, so there's no apartheid going on either. Is that so that this falsehood of this linkage, that we had our land stolen, they had their land stolen, and all that type of stuff. It horrifies me, quite frankly, because one, it's built on a falsehood, and it has this, the history of Aboriginals in Australia, and it goes right back to Charles Perkins in the 60s and so on, is that we've had a very good relationship with the Israeli community. In fact, with the Jewish community, then the Israeli community through that. We've had, we were looking back in, I think, I say we, I'm talking not me, I was too young then, but Charles Perkins and all them, they actually went to Israel and looked at the kibbutz as they work about how they could look at that idea for building economic development, getting housing, getting all these things going within that communities. And so it goes back all that way. So overall, Aboriginals are very pro-Israel, very pro-Jewish. In fact, we saw recently with the bombing of Iran, or the nuclear bombing, and then the response to that, we saw a whole group of Aboriginals who were trapped there because they were backwards and forwards going over there on exchanges, economic exchanges, educational exchanges, and so on. So this has been going on. So to me, it's a small minority who have hijacked this process and using our flag in this falsehood of that we are actually kindred people. Now, yes, we are kindred people as human beings and in some struggles and that, but this idea that they're a colonised, lost their land people and we're same colonised, lost our land people is just a falsehood.
And what about welcome to country? I feel like this at the moment is a bit of a contentious issue in terms of people feeling as though it is a bit overdone. I personally believe there's a place for it at things like the NRL Grand Final or the AFL Grand Final, really big special events on our calendar so that it doesn't lose. Because for me, welcome to country is something that is very significant, it's special, but it loses its gloss if you're seeing it done over and over and over again at every single event.
And also, they talk about a traditional thing, and yes, in certain cases it is true. But when I was growing up, no one did any welcome to countries or anything like that. But the idea when it came up, I thought it was a good idea too. I thought, this is a nice idea. Is people, it's like someone comes to your door, knocks on your door, you say, come in and have a cup of tea and sit down and, you welcome them. So I think it's a nice idea, but it has gone mad. In fact, through my business things, I've actually banned it. That's just nonsense. What it is, and it's losing its important reality in that, which is about bringing people together and recognising there are other people that lived here. Dubbo there, when I was the deputy mayor and also acting mayor there, and I used to do the citizenship programs. I used to, at the end of it, the formal stuff, I'd say, look, as an Aboriginal person, I'm glad you have chosen Australia and I welcome you to this country. And that's a welcome. There's sort of two parts for it. So one of it's overdone, like board meetings, committee meetings, school meetings, go to the, just walking down the street meetings, whatever. It gets a bit crazy, the aeroplanes and stuff like that. So and it loses that meaning. I agree with you. It should be on formal occasions. You have an international conference, Rotary for argument's sake. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people from overseas come here. It's great to welcome them. So that part. Overdone, great idea, and I think it's losing it. And because of that, there's a backlash, which is losing its importance. And I'd like to retain it for those important things. And the second part of that, which is a concern, is that some people have forgotten what welcome actually means. In fact, the bloke who was at the Melbourne Cricket Ground talking about 250,000 years of history, I don't know if he studied biology or archaeology or anthropology. Human beings have only been around 300,000 years. And also we know there's empirical evidence of 40,000 years and 60,000 years of Aboriginal people in this country. So let's stick to that, what the truth is, the record is. And the other part of it is a welcome. So people getting up there and running their political agenda. I had this friend of mine who said they had some of their board members come from overseas because of the international company, Australian company, but it's international. And they thought, it'd be a good idea to all welcome the country. So they brought this along, and the person sort of virtually said, look, you all come here, stole the land, murdered us, and you can all bugger off. And I'm sitting there going, no, that's not a welcome, actually. A welcome would have been a lot different to that, saying, thank you for coming to the country.
Now we're talking about new woke has been the words lately. 2014 during that Black Lives Matter was very much about the realisation of social injustice, waking up to different parts of history around the world. And it's now saying that in 2025/2024, the pendulum has swung so far away from where woke originally started from that we're almost expected to change our ways to suit the minority. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, again, it's about woke and the left have taken something which was important. Black lives do matter. And all lives matter. It got to a certain stage where if you actually said Black lives matter, all lives matter, then people say no, you're trivialising the Black Lives Matter stuff. No, you're not. We're all God's children. We all deserve the respect and love and to be treated decently. So something that was a serious issue that happened in the United States went global, and then it went mad because how do you fix things? You actually you have a conversation with each other, you meet each other, you deal with each other. This idea of, that people were kneeling at the national anthem and that, well, look, that was an insult to a lot of people, especially to servicemen and women and that who served under the national anthem, under the flag, and a lot of people like Australians are really funny. We haven't got necessarily the best national anthem. When you compare it to Americans, always got things 100 times better. They've got a great looking flag, great national anthem. We've got this, in fact, most people like to sing Waltz and Matilda. It's about a bloke who stole a sheep and drowned. So that's Australian culture. Yeah, but it's to me, that was an insult to people. You don't highlight your problem by insulting people. You say, look, we have it. So you do things by actually having a proper conversation with people and debating and arguing and stuff like that. The problem we're having with woke and that, you get something that needs to be concentrated on and fixed, they just smash it, they just overdo it, and then they bring in laws that say that if you don't do this, then you're going to be cancelled. How does that make people feel? That's sort of like the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany or something. If you don't do this, you're going to be cancelled. No, you don't get people on side by doing that. You actually explain to them and educate them and work with them.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the JJ podcast.